There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but it quietly rewrites a man's entire life from within. What happens when a woman breaks the man who would have loved her forever? We hear endless stories about women healing from heartbreak. What we rarely speak about is the silent devastation inside a man when his love, his loyalty, and his devotion are treated as disposable. Imagine a man who was ready to give everything, his time, his energy, his future, his heart, and that love is not only dismissed but shattered. What does that do to him? What does it teach us about the responsibility of holding someone's heart in our hands? And what if some loves, once broken, are never rebuilt again? Because when we talk about a man who would have loved her forever, we're not talking about fleeting affection or a passing attraction. We're talking about a man who was ready to build something lasting, something that could have carried both of them through decades. His love wasn't casual. It was rooted in loyalty, in responsibility, in a clear vision of the future. Yet men like this are often misunderstood. Their consistency is mistaken for predictability. Their loyalty is mistaken for weakness. Their patience is mistaken for a lack of value. And by the time the truth is finally seen, it's almost always too late. If you are or have been broken by a woman you would have loved forever and felt your identity crack in the silence, take this moment to anchor yourself. Like this video if you've ever sat in that pain and questioned who you were. Comment, forged. So I know you're not just watching, you're transforming. Share this with a brother who's standing at the same crossroads, unsure of his next move. Don't just absorb the lesson, step into it. Start this journey now with Stoic Station, where heartbreak becomes fire, and fire becomes identity. Because to understand what really happens next, we have to begin at the exact moment she broke something rare inside him. And that's where this story truly starts. 1. When she broke him, she broke something rare. There's a moment every man remembers, not the moment she walked away, but the moment something inside him collapsed so quietly he almost didn't notice it at first. A subtle shift, a dimming of something sacred. A crack running through the part of him he once believed was unbreakable. Men who love deeply often don't fall apart all at once. They unravel slowly, thread by thread, under the weight of the devotion that makes them rare in the first place. And that is the cruel irony. The very quality that makes such a man extraordinary is also the reason he ends up carrying the heaviest wounds. He was never perfect, but he was present. He wasn't flawless, but he was consistent. He built his identity around being the one steady place she could return to, even in her worst moments. He shaped his days with her in mind, anchored his decisions in her happiness, and carried her storms as if they were his own. He didn't just give love, he built a home with it, and he placed her at the center of it. That kind of love is not common. It's built with intention, discipline, patience, and the quiet belief that loyalty still has meaning in a world full of temporary people. So when that love was dismissed or betrayed, the wound didn't just hit his heart. It tore straight through the foundation he built his life on. He wasn't grieving a breakup. He was grieving a future he had already stepped into with both feet. The loss wasn't about losing her. It was about losing the man he became because of her and the life he thought they were building together. Women rarely see this type of collapse. They don't see the invisible architecture men build inside themselves, dreams placed carefully on top of loyalty, sacrifices positioned quietly behind every decision, hopes wrapped around one person with absolute certainty. When she broke him, she wasn't just ending a relationship, she was dismantling something sacred he never imagined could be destroyed. She was tearing down a structure of love he spent years constructing in silence. But here is the Stoic truth. What collapses often reveals what needed rebuilding. A man cannot rise until he confronts what he built without boundaries, what he gave without limits, and what he sacrificed without questioning. His rebirth begins the moment he accepts that losing her was not the end, it was the unveiling of himself. And that's the real tragedy. She didn't break just a man. She broke the last version of him who believed in love without fear, hesitation, or self-protection. Ask yourself, what part of you did you tie to someone else's approval? And what happens if you finally take it back? Now here's where the story sharpens, because the moment his silence replaces his devotion, everything begins to change. 2. She took his presence for granted until his absence became loud. Silence is always underestimated until it belongs to a man who once filled the room with his presence. It's easy to overlook someone who shows up every day, who answers without hesitation, who gives without being asked. Most men don't realize they're being devalued until the day they finally stop giving, and notice that nothing around them changes except for the ache they carry quietly inside. A man doesn't see his worth through compliments. He sees it through how people respond when he finally steps back. And for far too long, he believed that showing up consistently was the right thing. But consistency becomes invisible when the person receiving it treats it like sunlight, something that will always rise again tomorrow. When he was there every single day, she treated his loyalty like air, always available, always certain, always guaranteed. She assumed his patience would never run out, his forgiveness would always be within reach, and his effort would never dry up. She didn't intend to take him for granted, most people don't. But comfort has a way of muting gratitude. His kindness, the way he checked in, the way he made space for her feelings, the way he held her storms, all of it became background noise in a life she believed she had complete control over. But something shifted the moment his energy turned inward. At first it was subtle. His texts became shorter, his enthusiasm softened, his availability faded from instantaneous to thoughtful. Then came the quiet. The kind of quiet that unsettles the heart. The kind of quiet that makes a woman realize she was never paying attention to how much he carried. The day he withdrew wasn't the day he stopped caring. It was the day he finally understood he couldn't keep pouring into a place where his presence was treated as an obligation instead of a gift. And her world didn't stay the same, not even close. It got quieter in a way she didn't expect, in a way she didn't enjoy, because absence isn't just missing someone, it's being confronted with the weight of what their presence used to hold. She didn't miss his messages, she missed the man who composed them with intention. She didn't miss his attention, she missed the feeling of being seen in a way no one else saw her. She didn't miss the routine, she missed the certainty that he'd show up even on her darkest days. Absence exposes value, and that realization always arrives too late to undo the damage. This is where Stoicism becomes more than philosophy. It becomes survival. Detachment isn't about punishing her. It's about protecting the man he's becoming. Pulling away is not revenge. Pulling away is choosing alignment over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over emotional dependence. A man who practices detachment isn't running from love, he's running toward himself. He's learning to no longer offer pieces of his soul to someone who doesn't recognize the weight of what he gives. Detachment teaches him that love must flow both ways, or it becomes sacrifice disguised as devotion. And as he stepped back, something remarkable happened. His absence became her mirror. Suddenly she saw the truth she never noticed while he stood beside her. How much emotional labor he carried, how much stability he provided, how much gentleness he brought into her life, and how much emptiness appears when those qualities disappear. She didn't just lose his presence, she lost the emotional balance it gave her. Sit still for 30 seconds and ask yourself, if you disappeared today, what emotional roles would people suddenly notice they depended on? Because here's where the story deepens. Once a man learns how loud his absence can be, he never returns the same. And the next chapter begins the moment she realizes that the silence she feared most wasn't the end of him. It was the beginning of her awakening. 3. He gave everything, and that was the problem. A man doesn't break because he is weak. He breaks because he held too much for too long, because there comes a point when even the strongest hands can no longer carry the weight of a relationship he's been holding up alone. Men who love deeply rarely notice where their limits are. They give until it hurts, and then they keep giving, convinced that love will eventually balance itself out. But the truth is far simpler and far harsher. Loving past the point of self-preservation isn't devotion. It's slow self-destruction disguised as loyalty. He forgave what should have been confronted. He overlooked what should have been addressed. He stayed loyal long after loyalty stopped being mutual. This wasn't because he lacked awareness. It was because he believed that choosing her meant choosing patience, endurance, and sacrifice. He told himself that every relationship requires compromise. He told himself she would eventually see what he was doing for her. And he told himself that love demanded he stay, even when everything inside him whispered that something was off. The hardest men to break are the ones who keep standing long after they should have walked away. But endurance is a double-edged sword. The longer he tolerated the imbalance, the more she believed he could handle anything without breaking. She mistook his resilience for infinite emotional capacity. She interpreted his silence as indifference to pain. She assumed that because he carried the weight so well, it meant the weight wasn't heavy. She never realized that even strong men have limits, until he reached his. And limits, when crossed, don't crack quietly. They shatter. What hurts a man most isn't being left. It's recognizing that he betrayed himself first. He tolerated behaviors that violated his values. He accepted crumbs while offering a feast. He kept investing in someone who kept withdrawing from him. He ignored the warnings inside his own chest, choosing her over himself every single time. The moment he finally saw this truth, the pain cut deeper than anything she had done. It wasn't her actions alone. It was his willingness to shrink his needs to protect hers. This is where Stoicism reframes his heartbreak in a way that pulls him back to center. Love without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. A man must protect his peace with the same intensity he once used to protect the relationship. A man must set limits not to control anyone else, but to preserve the parts of himself he can't afford to lose again. Peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of self-respect. And in losing her, he finally regained that truth. No amount of giving will ever make someone value what they are committed to losing. His effort couldn't teach her gratitude. His loyalty couldn't teach her reciprocity, and his sacrifices couldn't teach her how to hold on to something precious. He learned that love is not proven by how much he endures, but by how well he honors himself while loving someone else. Write this down. 3 boundaries I ignored because I didn't want to lose her. And here's where the story sharpens even more. Because once a man learns where he ended and where she began, he becomes someone she never expected. A man who no longer bleeds to keep love alive. And that changes everything. 4. The day he chose distance, he chose himself. A man's silence isn't withdrawal, it's realignment. It's the quiet moment when he finally turns inward and listens to the part of himself he has ignored for far too long. People often mistake a man's distance as coldness or indifference, but in reality, it is one of the most powerful shifts he can make. Because men do not pull away when they stop caring. They pull away when they finally start caring about themselves. Men often lose themselves trying to save relationships that stopped serving them long ago. They get caught in cycles of over-explaining, over-giving, over-proving, hoping that if they just try a little harder, the connection will feel whole again. But you can't save something that's already sinking from the inside. And he finally understood that. He used to respond instantly, as if her messages were the heartbeat he needed to stay alive. Now he thinks before answering. He used to chase peace through her validation. Now he builds it quietly within himself. This wasn't him shutting down, it was him waking up. Ironically, the more emotionally self-controlled he became, the more she felt the shift. It unsettled her, because this was a version of him she could no longer pull back with guilt, fear, or the subtle emotional tugs she used to rely on. His distance wasn't reactive, it was intentional, and that intention changed everything. A man who stops relying on someone else for emotional regulation becomes a man who stands on ground she can't shake. That terrifies anyone who once depended on his chaos to feel centered. Nothing haunts a woman more than the moment she realizes the man who once made her feel chosen no longer needs her validation. Not because he stopped loving, but because he learned to love himself with the same intensity he once poured into her. His shift wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was subtle. Fewer explanations, calmer tone, slower replies, more presence with himself. She noticed, because the absence of emotional dependency is louder than words. She once held power through his longing. Now she felt powerless in the presence of his clarity. Stoicism teaches that distance is not punishment, it is clarity. Detachment is not rejection, it is the return to one's center. The man who chooses distance is not abandoning love. He is removing the illusions that blinded him. He is creating the space necessary to see the truth without the fog of emotional attachment. And the truth revealed what he should have seen from the beginning. A man's energy belongs first to himself. A man's peace is not a gift to others. It is a responsibility to his own soul. Ask yourself this: what parts of my identity feel strongest when I am alone? Because the man who can answer that honestly is the man who no longer fears losing anyone. He becomes grounded, steady, intentional, a version of himself that no heartbreak can unmake. And here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. The moment he chose distance was the moment she realized he was no longer the man she could break. He was becoming the man she would eventually regret losing. 5. Her freedom became the beginning of her regret. She thought letting him go meant gaining freedom. She didn't realize it meant losing home. In her mind, walking away from him opened the door to excitement, novelty, possibility, a life unburdened by what she believed was routine. But people misunderstand devotion until they are forced to live without it. The comfort he provided felt too steady, too stable, too predictable, and she mistook that stability for boredom. His consistency, something she would later crave, felt to her like the absence of spark. She believed she needed space, but what she truly needed was maturity. When she stepped into her new life, it felt liberating. New faces, new conversations, new attention from men who didn't know her well enough to see her flaws. She mistook all of it for emotional renewal. For a while, the noise was intoxicating. But noise is not depth, and temporary excitement has a short expiration date. The highs faded quickly, the faces blurred together, and she began to realize something terrifying. Nothing reached the depth he once offered her so effortlessly. No conversation felt as safe, no connection felt as honest, no affection felt as intentional. She wasn't missing a man, she was missing the emotional gravity he carried. Because the world is full of men who want her body, but very few want her soul. He was one of the few, and she let him slip, believing someone else could replace him easily. But soul-level connection is rare. The kind of devotion he gave her does not reappear in different faces. It is born from character, not attraction. It is shaped by discipline, not impulse, and it is lost only once. This is where the Stoic lesson rises to the surface. What isn't valued will be lost, and what is lost will eventually be understood, just not in time to change the ending. She walked away thinking she had endless chances to find something better. Instead, she learned that love without gratitude turns into emptiness faster than she ever expected. While he rebuilt in silence, she carried a question she could never escape. Why did I let the rarest love leave? It echoed in her mind at night, in quiet moments, in failed connections, in the eyes of men who could offer desire but not devotion. Months later, she would recognize what she once called freedom was actually avoidance. Avoidance of emotional responsibility, avoidance of vulnerability, avoidance of becoming the kind of woman capable of receiving a man like him. And the truth hit her harder than the breakup ever did. She wasn't running from him. She was running from the version of herself she was afraid to grow into. Reflect on this. What have I called freedom that was actually avoidance of emotional responsibility? And this is where the story sharpens even more, because the moment she realized her freedom was her downfall was the same moment he became unreachable. And nothing haunts a woman more than knowing she walked away from the one love she will never find again. 6. His pain became his transformation. A broken man doesn't stay broken, he becomes forged. The world teaches men to fear heartbreak, to see it as the moment everything ends, the moment identity dissolves and hope fractures. But heartbreak is not the death of a man. It is the fire that shapes him. It convinces him he's lost everything until he finally looks at the ashes and realizes something unexpected. The ashes are not empty. They are the beginning of something new, something stronger, something truer. At first, the pain swallowed him whole. He drowned in questions he never found answers for, replayed moments that cut deeper with every memory, and battled the regret he carried like a second skin. He questioned his worth, his choices, his devotion, and even the version of himself he became for her. But pain, when faced honestly, has a strange way of turning into direction. It forces a man to confront the parts of himself he ignored. It demands honesty. It demands clarity. It demands evolution. As he began rebuilding, he realized something vital. His collapse wasn't the end of who he was. It was the end of who he pretended to be to keep her. The version of himself that tolerated too much, explained too much, stayed too long, and sacrificed too deeply was never meant to last. It had to break. It had to die. Because you cannot rise into who you're meant to be while clinging to a role you played for someone who never understood its value. His heartbreak didn't make him weaker. It stripped away the illusions he used to hide behind. Pain carves truth into a man in a way comfort never can. It teaches him who he truly is, what he truly needs, and what he will never again allow into his life. It reveals the kind of love that nourishes him and the kind that destroys him. It clarifies the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment, between patience and self-betrayal. And most importantly, it teaches him boundaries, the lines he will never cross again, even for someone he once believed he couldn't live without. Stoicism reframes heartbreak as training. It disciplines the mind. It strengthens emotional fortitude. It cultivates sovereignty, the inner authority to say, my peace is mine, my direction is mine, my future is mine. A man who walks through heartbreak consciously becomes more aware, more grounded, more aligned with his purpose. He learns to stop negotiating with his standards. He learns to stop begging for what should be freely given. He learns that the heart can break without destroying him. He rose not despite the heartbreak, but because of it. And the man who emerged, the man sharpened by loss, disciplined by clarity, and strengthened by truth, became a version she never earned, a version she will never again have access to. Ask yourself, what strength did this heartbreak unlock that peace never could? Because here's the twist life always delivers. The strongest men are not the ones who avoid being broken, but the ones who use the breaking as the blueprint for their rebirth. And he was becoming exactly that. 7. In losing him, she lost the best version of herself. The final tragedy isn't that she lost him, it's that she lost who she became when he loved her. Most people never realize how much of their emotional identity is shaped by the person who sees their best self, the person who believes in them even when they struggle to believe in themselves. She didn't just lose a man, she lost the reflection he created, the version of herself she secretly wished she could sustain. She never understood how much of her confidence, softness, and emotional safety lived inside the way he looked at her, spoke to her, and held space for her flaws without turning them into weapons. He made her feel chosen in a world that often made her feel replaceable. He made her feel valued when she doubted her own worth. He made her feel protected in ways she didn't have language for until he was gone. He wasn't simply a partner, he was the mirror that reflected back the woman she wanted to be. And when she walked away, that mirror shattered. What she lost was not just the man who loved her, it was the version of herself that only existed in the safety of his devotion. That kind of reflection cannot be replicated through casual affection or temporary attention. It exists only where unconditional love and emotional security intersect. And no matter where she goes, no matter who she meets, no matter how many new beginnings she tries to create, she won't see that version of herself again. Not because she can't become better on her own, but because certain versions of us only emerge in environments where we feel profoundly seen. He provided that environment. He offered that emotional ground. He gave her the space to grow into a softer, more grounded, more self-assured woman. Without him, she wasn't just lonely, she was unanchored. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in quietly. It shows up during moments of comparison, when she realizes the men she meets now admire her charm but don't understand her depth. It appears in memories she didn't value while she had them. Small gestures, quiet reassurances, the way he stood by her when she wasn't her best. It hits hardest when life becomes heavy again and she needs someone who loves the way he did, and no one does. Not because men are incapable of loving her, but because very few men love with the kind of steady devotion that once defined her world. Stoicism teaches acceptance. Once a bond is broken beyond recognition, the past becomes a lesson, not a destination. And she learned that lesson too late. His rebirth became her curse. Her freedom became her haunting. She broke the man who would have loved her forever, and in doing so, she broke the only place she was ever truly cherished. She lost him, but more painfully, she lost the version of herself she could only access through the depth of his love. Close your eyes and ask yourself, who am I becoming because of what I lost? And who am I becoming because of what I learned? And this is where the truth cuts deepest. In losing him, she didn't just lose love. She lost the one version of herself she will never find again. Brother, if you're still here listening to these words, then something inside you already knows. Being broken by someone you would have loved forever was never the end of your story. It was the threshold, the moment life stripped away the illusions and introduced you to the man you were always meant to become. You are not defined by who walked away. You are defined by the strength you chose to stand back up with. Sometimes life removes the person you thought you needed, so you can finally meet the version of yourself who doesn't rely on anyone to feel whole. So walk forward with calm, unshakable strength, not to prove anything to her, but to remind yourself that your worth was never dependent on someone who failed to recognize it. Your value existed before she arrived, and it continues long after she's gone. If anything in this message reached you, if even one line echoed the truth you've been trying to avoid, then like this video and subscribe to Stoic Station. This is where men rebuild themselves with clarity, discipline, and a level of inner power that no heartbreak can take from them. And before you go, let me leave you with one final question. The kind that stays with you long after the video fades to black. Are you becoming the man she broke? or the man she accidentally awakened? Drop your answer in the comments, brother. Your transformation is already in motion. Let's walk this path together, one step, one truth, one breakthrough at a time.